Okay, so now let's go on to the movements in the stomach. The movements in the stomach basically occurs due to contraction and relaxation of the muscles of the stomach. And the intragastric pressure, which can be measured, increases with contraction and decreases with relaxation. Now let's look at the different parts of the stomach. This is the fundus. So this is the fundus, this part is the fundus, then this is the body, this is the antrum, and this is the pylorus. Okay, so there is very little movement in the fundus and the body, and this part basically acts as a reservoir of food. In antrum, there is mixing of food with digestive juices and breakdown of food into smaller particles. And in pylorus, the gastric emptying occurs. Okay, so these are the parts of the stomach. Now what are the different movements in the stomach? Movements are movements in empty stomach, receptive relaxation, and digestive peristalsis. So let's start with movements in empty stomach. What did we learn? Movements in empty intestine, empty GI tract is basically migratory motor complex. This migratory motor complex gives rise to this movement in empty stomach. The migratory motor complex is basically the basis of the movements in empty stomach. There are three types of movements: type 1, type 2, and type 3. Type 1, there is a pressure change of 5 centimeter of H2O. See, small contractions. The rate is 3 per minute. These are discrete movements and they take place about 25% of the total observed time. Okay, these are all in empty stomach. Now let's go on to type 2 movements. These are stronger, as you can see from the diagram over here. These are stronger. These are also known as hunger contractions. Okay, hunger pangs or hunger contractions. These are nothing but type 2 movements in empty stomach. And the basis is migratory motor complex. These may be slightly painful. Hunger pains. So they are also known as hunger pains. The pressure change is about 50 centimeter of H2O. In type 1 we had 5 centimeter, while in type 2 we have 50 centimeter. Rate is same, 3 per minute, and it is found in about 15% of the total time. Now let's go on to type 3. Type 3, here what is happening, the tone of the stomach is increased. The baseline is increased. See, the baseline is increased. And on top of that, type 2 movements are superimposed. So the base is increased, the basal tone is increased, and on top of that type 2 are superimposed. This is only found in 1% of the time, so this is rare. Now, so 25 plus 15 plus 1, rest of the remaining 60% of time, no movements are seen, and the stomach is said to be in quiescence. This is probably, as I have said, these movements in empty stomach are due to migratory motor complex. And the purpose of this movement is to move out the residual food in stomach, including the residual food in the intestine. So we ate a meal. Now digestive process occurs, but everything has not been removed. Some remnants remain back. Some things remain back. These remnants have to be removed before we take in the next meal, so that the next meal can be properly digested. This removal of the remnants is done by movements in empty stomach. Now the next is receptive relaxation. Second movement of stomach is receptive relaxation. Here what is happening? There is active relaxation of the stomach, especially the body and fundus after food intake. The movements are generally confined to the antrum and pylorus. Very little movement occurs in the fundus and the body, but this receptive relaxation mainly occurs in the fundus and the body. This is after food intake. How do we know that relaxation occurs? Because even after taking a large meal, the intragastric pressure does not change. We take in, the gastric contents increases, but the pressure does not change. Basically, why do we need this receptive relaxation? It helps us to accommodate a large meal. Say, in your regular days, if for lunch, for your dinner, you take small amounts of food or a standard set amount of food. But say you go to a buffet. What do? You gorge on food. So where does that extra food go? That extra food can be accommodated because your stomach relaxes to accommodate that food. Okay, this is known as receptive relaxation, and this receptive relaxation can be explained by the Laplace's law. Okay, so Laplace's law, what is Laplace's law? This is just plain physics. Laplace's law states that P is equal to 2T by R, where P is the intragastric pressure, T is the wall tension, R is the radius of the stomach. So when food is taken in, stomach wall is stretched and there is increase in wall tension. T increases, but due to receptive relaxation, the R also increases, because due to relaxation the volume increases, so the radius increases, the R also increases with increased gastric contents. Now thus the P remains relatively unchanged. This R increases, T increases, so they increase proportionally, so this P, the ratio remains constant. So there is no rise in intragastric pressure due to this receptive relaxation. Okay, T increases due to wall stretching, R increases due to receptive relaxation. Okay. Now this is mediated by two mechanisms, the vasovagal and the vagovagal and the vagosympathetic reflexes. The vagovagal nerves include the noradrenergic and non-cholinergic fibers of the vagus, and they release VIP, adenine and dopamine, which causes relaxation of the stomach. While the vagosympathetic fibers helps in receptive relaxation by inhibiting acetylcholine. Okay, so these two mechanisms acts by different neurotransmitters. Now, next part is digestive peristalsis. Before going on to digestive peristalsis, we need to know a little bit about peristalsis. What is peristalsis? Peristalsis is basically a propulsive movement found in many tubular organs with smooth muscles in their wall. So, what are some organs, tubular organs or hollow organs with smooth muscles in their walls? They are gut, ureter, fallopian tube. We get this peristalsis or propulsive movement in all these structures. That is, we get peristalsis in gut, in ureter, in fallopian tube. And what is the use of peristalsis? The main function of peristalsis is to help carry forward the contents of the tube. So in the gut, it carries forward the chyme and the food remnants in the digested food, bolus. In ureter, it carries forward the urine, and in fallopian tube, it carries forward the ovum, okay, or fertilized zygote. Okay. Now, let's go on to the function. What is the function of this peristalsis? Digestion. It helps in digestion. It helps in absorption. It prevents bacterial growth by pushing the bacteria towards the colon. We have already discussed this. It prevents distension of the GIT by expulsion of intestinal gases, okay, by various processes which takes place in the intestine, including the action of the bacterial microflora. There is accumulation of lots of gas. We will talk about this in the next class, okay, but just know that due to this gas, distension can occur, so the gas has to be removed. This is removed by peristalsis. And it also increases blood flow and lymph flow. Now, it's mediated by neural mechanism, hormonal mechanism. So neural is, as we know, parasympathetic stimulates while sympathetic inhibits. Parasympathetic stimulates while sympathetic inhibits. And the hormones are involved are acetylcholine substance P, vasoactive intestinal peptide, nitric oxide, ATP. Okay, and the types of peristalsis are type 1, which is the short range peristalsis, type 2, which is the rush or fast peristalsis, and type 3, which is the anti-peristalsis or vomiting. Okay, now let's go on to the law of intestine. What is the law of intestine? If a point of the intestine is stimulated, the part above, that is proximal, here this is the oral side, this is the arboreal side, that is the anal side. Okay, so this is, you give a stimulus, the part above that, that is the part proximal to that, the part towards the oral side, constricts, while the part distally relaxes. This contraction or constriction is brought about by acetylcholine and substance P, and this relaxation is brought about by ATP and ATP, nitric oxide, and VIP. Okay, so due to this contraction and relaxation, this ensures that the food only moves towards the arboreal side. Okay, this is also responsible for the polarity of the intestine. Thus the food or the chyme always moves away from the oral cavity. So this was a general thing about peristalsis. Now let's talk about the digestive peristalsis. What is digestive peristalsis? So we talked about peristalsis. Now we are going to talk about digestive peristalsis. Now digestive peristalsis basically starts as soon as food enters the stomach. These are initiated by gastric slow waves, which are BER of the stomach. As I said earlier, BER does not give rise to contraction except in the stomach, where it gives rise to the digestive peristalsis. Okay, and the pacemaker for this are not the intestinal cells of Kessel. These are present in the longitudinal muscle layer in the greater curvature in the upper part of the body of the stomach. Okay, so this is the greater curvature, this is the body, this is the upper part of the body. In the upper part of the body, the longitudinal muscle layer, you have the pacemaker. Initially we have a small indentation. Look at this. Initially small indentation. This is followed by a ring of constriction. This indentation slowly moves towards the antrum and produces a ring of constriction towards the middle portion of the stomach. This is followed by this ring of constriction proceeds towards the pylorus as a wave, and then finally you see here it causes constriction of the pyloric antrum. Okay, so initially this indentation is very weak, then it gradually becomes strong as it moves towards the antrum and the pylorus. Weak, stronger, and here it's very strong. Okay, so what are the character of this digestive peristaltic waves? The waves occur regularly at the rate of 3 per minute. 3 such contractions are present at a time. And the function of these digestive peristaltic waves are, it helps to mix the contents of the stomach, helps to grind them into chyme, that is, mixes the contents, then breaks down the contents, and these digestive peristalsis and the pyloric wave is also responsible for the gastric emptying. And during gastric peristalsis, basically the fundus remains silent. It starts from the body and the fundus remains silent. No movement in the fundus occurs. So let's go on to gastric emptying. Okay, this is important. What is gastric emptying? Gastric emptying is a process by which stomach empties its contents into the duodenum. This is achieved by gastric peristalsis, as we just talked about, and simultaneous inhibition of duodenal contraction. Okay, there is contraction of the pylorus and antrum and inhibition of contraction of the duodenum. Okay, so first peristaltic contraction at the antrum and pylorus. That peristaltic wave reaches the pylorus. Immediately after reaching the pylorus, there is closure of the pyloric sphincter. Okay, that is due to the contraction of the pylorus. So wave is coming towards the pylorus. Pylorus contracts. A small amount of content is squirted into the duodenum. Immediately there is closure of the pyloric sphincter. So as a result, the contents which were going towards the pylorus strikes the closed pyloric sphincter and turns back vigorously. Okay, this part where contraction of the pylorus causes a small amount of content to be squirted into the duodenum is known as the antral palm. And this part where the antral contents strikes the closed pyloric sphincter and turns back, this is known as retropulsion. Okay, so let's look at this diagram. Here you see the contents are moving towards the antrum and the pylorus, moving towards the pylorus from the antrum. There is contraction of this pylorus. As a result, some amount of this yellow contents goes into the duodenum. Okay, immediately after contraction of this pylorus, there is closure of the pyloric sphincter. See, this blue part is the pyloric sphincter, it closes. So the food contents or bolus which was moving towards the duodenum strikes this closed sphincter and turns back. Okay, so this is the antral pump. This is the retropulsion. The forward propulsion of gastric contents due to pyloric contraction plus retropulsion due to pyloric sphincter closure vigorously mixes the food and breaks it down into smaller particles. This together is known as the geysered action due to pyloric contraction, and as a result, the food particles are broken down into smaller parts. See? Okay. So now the important things are factors regulating the gastric emptying. Some finely balanced processes which are under the influence of the various factors are the volume of the meal, the osmolarity in the duodenum, the pH of the duodenum, the products of lipid and protein digestion in the duodenum, stretching of the duodenum, some neural influences, some hormonal influences, and finally role of emotion. There is some role of emotion. So gastric emptying can be delayed or gastric emptying can be increased. The delay is due to occurs by decreasing the strength and contraction of the antrum pylorus and decreased proximal gastric motility. The forward movement of the stomach and contraction of the antrus and pylorium is decreased, so there is decreased gastric emptying or slow gastric emptying. While in if there is increased strength of contraction of the antrum and increased intragastric pressure in the proximal part and opening of pylorus, there is increased or fast gastric emptying. Okay. So these are the factors regulating the gastric emptying. So first, let's talk about the volume of meal. If the volume of meal is more, then the stomach will take more time to empty. So larger volume requires more time to empty, and thus gastric emptying is delayed. T is directly proportional to root over V. Now osmolarity of duodenal contents. Gastric emptying is designed in such a way that the end product will be that the duodenum will have isotonic contents. So the gastric emptying always tries to make the duodenal contents isotonic. Now if the duodenum has hyperosmolar contents, that is amino acid, glucose, KCl solution, then the gastric emptying is delayed. If the duodenum has hypoosmolar contents, then the gastric emptying hastened to make the contents isotonic. So depending upon the osmolarity of the duodenal contents, the gastric emptying is changed, increased or decreased. So how do we know that the gastric duodenal contents are hyperosmolar or hypoosmolar? These are basically detected by receptors known as, or cells known as osmoreceptors, which are present in the wall of the duodenum and jejunum. These osmoreceptors change in size according to osmolarity. If the contents in the duodenum are hypoosmolar, water flows from the lumen into the wall. There is swelling or increase in size of the osmoreceptor. If there is hyperosmolar contents in the lumen, water flows into the lumen from the cells and there is decrease in size of the osmoreceptors. The small size of the osmoreceptors delay emptying, that is in hyperosmolar condition there is delay in emptying, while large size of the osmoreceptors which occurs in hypoosmolar contents, there is increased gastric emptying. Basically the main reason for this is this prevents the excessive rise of intraduodenal pressure. Otherwise what will happen? In hypovolemia there would be large distension of stomach. Okay. So osmolarity of duodenum is very important. Next is pH of duodenal contents. We talked about the volume of meal, then osmolarity of the duodenum contents, then we are talking about the pH of duodenal contents. If there is acidic pH in the duodenum, then gastric emptying is delayed. As a result of delay, less acidic chyme enters the duodenum and pH gradually increases. This is basically a protective mechanism because duodenum does not have the mucosal barrier. And as a result, if more acidic contents enters the duodenum will be damaged and you will have duodenal ulcer. Okay. This is basically mediated via vagus and secretin. Now, We talked about volume of meal, then pH of duodenal contents, osmolarity of duodenal contents. Now we are talking about products of lipid and protein digestion in the duodenum. So excess lipids and proteins of protein digestion in the duodenum delays emptying. We take large amounts of protein and lipid. They are being digested, and for a long time the duodenum is taking, or the intestine is taking a long time to digest the protein and lipid. The duodenum has protein and lipid. So the stomach delays the emptying so that more protein and lipid does not enter the duodenum. First, the stomach waits for the products to be cleared from the duodenum, then more protein and lipid are allowed to enter the duodenum. So this is mainly mediated by CCKP set. If a lipid fat rich diet is taken along with alcohol, gastric emptying is delayed. As a result, alcohol remains in the stomach for a longer time. Absorption of alcohol from intestine is delayed. Plasma alcohol level does not rise acutely, and the intoxication is delayed. So, to delay intoxication, many people take very high fat diet along with alcohol. Okay. So, next is distension of the duodenum. So, volume of meal, pH of duodenal contents, osmolarity of duodenal contents, products of lipid and protein digestion in duodenal. Now, distension of the duodenum. Distension or stretching of the duodenum leads to reflex inhibition of the gastric emptying. This is known as enterogastric reflex. This enterogastric reflex, this is basically the summary of the previous points. Reflex closure of the pyloric sphincter in response to hyperosmolarity, acidity, duodenal distension, presence of products of protein and lipid digestion in the duodenum is known as enterogastric reflex. This is what we just learned in the previous slides. If the contents are hyperosmolar, if the contents are acidic, if the contents distend the duodenum, if there is presence of products of protein and lipid digestion in the duodenum, there will be enterogastric reflex or closure of the pyloric sphincter. Okay, this is a protective mechanism. Now the neural factors. Vagal stimulation stimulates gastric emptying, that is parasympathetic stimulation stimulates gastric emptying, while sympathetic stimulation inhibits gastric emptying. Now the hormonal factors are CCK, secretin, GIP, somatostatin all delay gastric emptying, while gastrin stimulates gastric emptying. Now the final point is emotion. When we are excited, gastric emptying is stimulated. Like when we are depressed or sad, the gastric emptying is delayed. Okay. Now another thing is staying power. Staying power of food refers to how long the food can keep the stomach full and the person does not feel hungry. Fatty meal has the longest staying power. That is, from this graph, it is very clearly shown. If you take in a standard carbohydrate, protein, lipid meal, take in a protein meal and take in only a protein plus lipid meal. The protein plus lipid meal makes you feel full for a longer period of time because this protein plus lipid meal delays gastric emptying. Okay. And some applied to this is gastroparesis, where there is decreased gastric motility, and dumping syndrome. Okay, if you want to go through this dumping syndrome is found in basically after gastric bypass surgery. The stomach is stapled and reservoir function of stomach is lost. Thus, we require frequent small meals. If a large meal is taken, glucose is rapidly absorbed from the intestine because the food bypasses the stomach and directly goes to the intestine. Large amount of glucose goes to the intestine at the same time. Rapid rise of insulin leading to hypoglycemia, dizziness and sweating. And since there is no gastric emptying mechanism present, the content in the duodenum becomes hyperosmolar. There is hypovolemia, distension due to movement of water from wall into lumen. This 1 and 2 together forms the dumping syndrome. And the dumping syndrome is very distressing. And the only management is to avoid taking large meals and only take small frequent meals. This dumping syndrome is basically one of the main reasons for success of the gastric bypass surgery. Okay. So next class we are going to do vomiting and movements of the small intestine and large intestine and defecation.